So I feel like the three of you gave really inspiring speeches about, paths forward and, good things, good vibes. So I'm going to go in the opposite direction for a sec and ask you guys, like, what worries you? Like when you think about space over the next 10, 20 years, what are the things that concern you? What are the things that you would like to tell everyone, like, hey, we need to be looking out for this. We need to be thinking about this. This may keep me up at night. What are some things that worry you?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So I think two things. The first is that for, I would say, decades now, space and space policy and the space industry has been very nonpartisan. And I say nonpartisan rather than bipartisan because I think bipartisan implies that there's a lot more to the partisan nature of politics and policy with space than actually exists. Most of the time when I was on the Hill, and Mary probably found this in the Senate as well, is that the politics associated with space was mostly just colloquial. Like it was like, what's your local thing that you're supposed to care about? And that local thing is what drove your decision making rather than whether or not you were a Republican or a Democrat. In other words, like the Alabama delegation versus the Texas delegation versus the Florida delegation, as opposed to, what Republicans or Democrats wanted. And I think it would be very easy for the politics of today to deteriorate in space and space policy and the space industry in a way that would make it very difficult for people to cooperate with each other. The second thing that I think a lot about is the international nature of space. And I think our country has done a really good job of preparing for what we're seeing right now with Russia. We've got the commercial cargo program, we've got the commercial crew program, we've got the commercial LEO destinations program. So we've been preparing and we've been doing a really good job of being ready for potential international problems. And I do think that there's a lot of reason to believe that the future of space will also be very international and cooperative. But I think the current state of affairs with Russia's attack on Ukraine gives us reason to think that in the future it may be difficult to cooperate. And so I think a lot about that and how we can build bridges with other countries to develop opportunities that maybe today don't exist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Jared more. I think that those are both items, frankly, that keep me up at night. To add another one, I think that there's been a lot of rhetoric in the news recently about, space billionaires and how space is like a joyride for the rich. And I personally, as someone who's involved in space policy, get so frustrated because while there is, some element of that, thinking about all of the incredible things that space can do for us here on Earth, all of the avenues it opens up for the future of humanity, it drives me bonkers. And it's something I think about a lot in terms of how do we counter that? How do we get out the word about things like the World Economic Forum finding that 50% of climate variables can only be observed from space? How do we get the word out about the way that space contributes to our weather modeling, contributes to the inspiration of generations of students who go into STEM, looking back at the Apollo program and how powerful that was for an entire generation of young people who have grown up and have really committed themselves to a career in space or in any other form of STEM. So I really hope that we'll be able to counter that narrative and show people that we don't just go to space for a billionaire's joyride or something along those lines. Space tourism in and of itself has a means to an end. There is value in that, and the way that we go from where we are today to our future is reliant in some way, shape, or form on that. So that's another one of my worries.
I think first I would say, if you haven't read the 2019 U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission report, it's a mouthful. It's a really, really good report done by a committee that was created by Congress for the sole purpose of essentially doing this very in-depth research on what China's up to across like a whole host of issues. But the 2019 report actually has a whole chapter on China's space ambitions. And I think one thing that's important to recognize is China, when it comes to everything, they think, 10 plus years ahead, or even more, 25 years. And they've been working very, very hard to get to the level that we're at, and then eventually hoping to supersede us. And in this report, you'll read that they want to dominate this new domain, which is the space domain. They believe the next warfighting domain. And they're doing it through a number of different ways, including a fusion between their military and their, quote, commercial sector. They're pumping money into advancing systems, and I mean, they're very quickly, they're going to be completing their space station that's now up there, which ties a little bit into what Jared was saying about ensuring that the US continues to maintain our relationships with other countries, because what we're seeing is China is approaching different nations and saying, hey, our government will subsidize, and then we'll fly your payloads to space on our station. You don't have to pay anything, but you can kiss your IP goodbye, essentially. That's what's happening. And companies such as mine are facing this new threat in the realm of competition. If we have China going around the world and essentially slashing prices and being able to provide countries who want access to space access, it's harmful for our US sector. So that's just one thing. Sorry, I was a long-winded one. Definitely read the report though. And then the other is, I think STEM. I think we're starting to feel the neglect of really putting our back into advancing STEM around our nation. You can just see, like I keep making pitches about how we're hiring, but no one can hire fast enough right now. There's jobs everywhere, and I think we're finally really coming to this moment where we're seeing oh crap, do we have enough people who are ready and able to help build out these space stations? Yeah, no. And it's worrisome, and I think we talk a lot about it in Congress, but we need to see more action, and we're seeing the results of this now, so.
No, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Jared was over here nodding like crazy. And I do have a follow-up on the first part of what you just mentioned, Erica, about, especially with commercial space stations and commercial projects. I think what we're seeing is that, traditionally when we divide the space sector, right, it goes civil, commercial, national security in some order, but right, those are the three lanes, as you were. To what extent do you think they're actually separate? One of the questions we have in the chat is, should commercial space projects, like commercial space stations, be also considered a matter of national security, right? How do ostensibly purely commercial projects intersect with those domains, whether they be China or Space Force or whatever have you?
Sure, yeah. So I think that's a great question. I think thinking about also the end of life of the International Space Station, when it goes offline, 2030, 2031, whatever that might be, hopefully not sooner, we're gonna need to have, if we wanna maintain, so NASA always views the ISS as this means of soft power, right? We've created so many great relationships with the international community, and proven out that space is truly the place where we can work together. And will the commercial sector be able to continue these relationships? And I'm talking about the US domestic commercial sector. And I think we can. I can speak from experience. Axiom just signed a deal with Hungary to send a Hungarian astronaut up to space. We're speaking with a few Middle Eastern countries, you'll probably hear about soon, and some Asian countries. And so we're really working to not only continue partnerships with existing ISS partners, but also expand that. And then I think also commercial is being more embedded and embraced by national security. I think we see the NRO talking about a larger scale switch to commercial services. We can do things cheaper, we can do things faster. And that's kind of how some things should be done, right? at some point you need to, if we need to be serious about moving ahead and being very competitive, we need to enable our commercial sector.
Can I say
No,
something about
yeah,
that?
please.
So I think that it's really important that the U.S. maintain distinct sectors, but we describe it as civil, commercial, national security. I think it's important that, and Mary works for an organization that works full time on this, that the commercial space be more than just contracting by a different name. Like that we need to actually be utilizing the development of commercial marketplaces for the benefit of U.S. government, and really for the benefit of our allies around the world, and that the civil and national security aspects of that be distinctly different sectors. I think that when you look at the Outer Space Treaty, when you look at all of the international agreements that have been developed since the advent of the space age, we've tried really hard to draw a distinction between those military activities that perhaps are necessary for an individual nation's national security and those activities that are necessary for the development of humanity, right? Like the civil space programs in much of these countries and with our allies, they're meant for the development of science and exploration and for the furtherance of humanity as a culture, as a species. And I think that's a distinctly different thing from what we may need to do to protect our national interests. And so I think, at least from the US perspective, that it's really important that we keep those things separate. If other countries want to fuse those things and take on the risks associated with that, then that's up to them. But I think the US should be very careful to maintain those distinctions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And to kind of footstomp something that you were saying earlier, Jared, about how the United States has been preparing for years to make sure that we have domestic capabilities that can get us to space, specifically to low Earth orbit. I mean, just looking at our current geopolitical landscape, think about if we were still fully reliant on the Soyuz vehicle for access to space. That's a civil program, and it's important to just keep civil and national security separate. But it's impossible to ignore that there are some national security elements of our civil programs. And so thinking about also, we have wonderful companies like Erica's, who I hear is hiring, who are developing a commercial LEO destination to make sure that the United States has domestic capabilities and that it's not just low Earth orbit for the Chinese with their space station. So I think it's important to think about the soft power elements of those, as well as some of the national security elements of these civil programs that need to be kept separate from national security, but that are in some ways kind of inseparable from it.
Yeah. No, I think that makes. Oh, did you have another?
We have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Go for it.
Hi, everyone. So first off, I want to say thank you so much for coming and speaking to all of us today. As a early professional and college student myself, being able to have this kind of exposure is just fantastic. But I wanted to expand on something that Erica started to talk about when you were discussing, for example, Axiom having deals with Hungary to bring Hungarian astronauts and members of other nations. And I was just wondering if any of you had anything further to say regarding the sort of collaboration between the commercial sector, the American commercial sector, and international space diplomacy. I think that that's just a really fascinating area that's being charted right now. I mean, I've been looking at regional competitions. For example, the Korean Space Agency is trying to be able to have Nuri to have competing with JAXA and everything, and it's just so fascinating. So I would love to hear more about that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's some stuff you'll probably hear soon that's going to be like right up your alley on that I can't talk about. But I will say that I think also a lot of the agreements that we're forging with these countries, usually they'll begin with so in the case of Hungary, for example, what they really wanted to do is build and create a new sector. They want to advance their technology and their science and their STEM, really. And so we talked to them, we're like, okay, if you want to start, the relationship slow, right? We could do some payloads, some science, some research, and that is how it started. We started talking about payloads and what we could fly, and then it kind of grew and it flourished into this thing where we then were, we became close, and now we're flying an astronaut. We're also training and flying a member of the Italian Air Force. Also, we have a partnership with Thales Alenia, which is a company in Italy that is building the shells of our modules. They actually built a number, or I think a bulk, maybe most of the shells of the US segment of the ISS currently up there. Our CEO was a program manager for ISS for 10 years, but he's worked on the ISS program for 20 before coming and starting Axiom. So he's taken a lot of that knowledge forward, and we want to engage. We're pretty much looking for countries that want to become a spacefaring nation, and we want to give them access however we can, and whatever they want to do, whether that's they have priorities in science and research, or whether they want to send someone to space, we can make it all happen. And so I think there is an element of diplomacy happening on the commercial side, and it's really a global effort, or global reach, and we want to enable countries to participate and advance their science and research, as well as continue on U.S. partnerships.
I'd also note, I think it's really exciting that we're able to lead with some of America's competitive advantages. And what I mean when I say that is thinking about American ingenuity, American talent, really showing off what our commercial sector can do. Erica hit on it earlier a little bit, where the commercial sector often can do things faster, they can do things cheaper, and I would add they can also do things in a more innovative manner. They're not afraid to fail and to try risky things and to seek out these new opportunities. So I would just like to say that it's really exciting to see us putting a really strong foot forward and lead with our historical competitive advantage here.
What they said.
Awesome. So we have a lot of students and young professionals here today in the audience, as well as joining us virtually. As someone who was once in those shoes, may still be in those shoes, what's one thing that each of them could do right now, like in the next month, next 3 months, next 6 months, kind of get us closer to some of the goals and visions you guys have been talking about, right? Like what's one thing, whether they're in government or in industry, or they're just getting into space, they've been a fan of space for 10 years, like what are some of the ways that they can start to get involved and help, shape space policy moving forward?
So I am just outside of the target age range for, which is it's disorienting to not be a young professional after I've been a young professional for so long. The thing, so I know this isn't going to be true for everybody in this room, and I know everybody is sort of facing different challenges and having a different life experience than maybe I had. For me, I spent as much time as I could possibly spend trying to become an expert in the field that I wanted to be in. So I have a friend, Brandon Eden, who we worked together on the Hill, and when we first met, he was just starting to get interested in space, and now he's a big deal over at ULA. But he at the time he was working for Kevin McCarthy, and Kevin has a bunch of space interests in his district, and now, of course, y'all probably know that he's about to become the speaker, my guess is, in 6-7 months. But Brandon was just trying to learn about space. And he was interested in it, and he wanted to talk about it. And I was in the middle of battling for the Space Coast at the time, which I mentioned before had lost a ton of jobs and that sort of thing. And he came to me, he's like, yeah, can you teach me a little bit about space? And I handed him like 10 reports. And I was like, here, after you read these, then we can talk. And I think the lesson for that for me was I spent a lot of time just trying to learn as much as I could, trying to ask as many questions as I could, spending, I mean, I know it's not like fun and sexy, but like when there are opportunities for you to like take a class, or if there's an opportunity for you to sit in on a lecture or something like that, you have no idea where that stuff's going to lead you, and you have no idea who you're going to meet when you do that stuff. And I think just stepping outside your comfort zone, learn as much as you can learn about that topic. And I think you'd be really surprised at people seeking you out for information, and where that might lead. So yeah, I guess I would say spend as much time as you can trying to become an expert in whatever the thing is that you're interested in.
Yeah, I really like that. I would argue you guys have already taken that step in being here with us today. And so thinking about what you can be doing in the next weeks, months, hours even, make sure that you're taking the time to talk to someone new, talk to a bunch of someone's new, and engage with people who maybe you haven't met, who might be doing something completely different from what you're doing. And I would encourage you to do that throughout the conference. You would be surprised, or at least I was when I was, I guess I'm still kind of in your shoes, but I'm always surprised by how many people are willing to sit down and talk and be helpful. And to Jared's point, it's always helpful when you've read the reports, you've done the work, you show that you're serious. But combining that with making the networking connections and following up on them and making sure that you're maintaining those, I think is really important. And you have a wonderful opportunity this week to be doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to have to agree with them. I think just don't be afraid to ask people to talk to you or see if they would connect you with someone, or, a lot of times if they can't help you, they know someone who can. So I know it can be intimidating, but it's not. It's all good.
So Maxwell, I know that we're out of time, but
Fortunately, we are.
But you promised that I would be able to talk about some of my failures. So
Cody, can we talk about failures? Awesome.
I'm just gonna tell you one story about how I failed hard and how embarrassing it was. And then that way you can see it's okay to fail even in the most high stakes places. So the very first National Space Council meeting that had happened, the first ever publicly, but the first National Space Council meeting in 25 years, is breaking news coverage from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and the Vice President Pence, is conducting this council meeting, and it's, as you might imagine, extremely stressful. I was the chief of staff of the Space Council at the time. This is my show. I had to put it all together from nothing. And the Vice President does his speech, and he sits down, and he calls up witnesses to talk at the first Space Council meeting ever. And Gwen Shotwell's name is spelled wrong on her nameplate. And I had to live with knowing that I spelled Gwen Shotwell's name wrong on a nameplate on national TV while she was speaking to the Vice President. So I have since apologized multiple times, and that's the sort of thing that lives rent-free in my head, so you're welcome. So learn from my failure, double check all of your names if you ever have to do nameplates twice.
Valuable life lesson. And with that cheery note, this concludes our panel for today. Thank you all to our speakers for a wonderful discussion. And I believe we have Cody will tell you what's coming up next. Let's give it up for our speakers.